Okay, so what I'm suggesting, I know that there are a number of people still asking questions, is I would really leave to the 5 panelists and Mark to just have a final comments on the way what they have got out of this meeting and the way they see the way forward. Mark,
Well, so let's start at the end, Nancy, and just take a very brief.
Yeah, I'd say, for me, the big, I've been around for a number of measurement initiatives in my career. FuseNet, I was very involved with that, and then more recently the SMART initiative. And I really think that this pressure to have, sort of standardized comparative approaches is a real one, and it's important. And I think what we need to decide is which of these aspects of resilience could be standardized and which can't. And of those that currently can't, how many of those might be standardized if we actually were able to do the work around getting them to happen?
I'm going to end with a deep, dark fear for Lawrence. And it's one that actually sits fairly early on in that in the phases that you laid out. And it's really that, a lot of the, improved data and modeling that we're trying to get our heads around is based on some prediction. And, we're figuring out, if you had to give policy advice or program advice, what's the best horse to back in terms of a capacity or conditions or sets of them for this population, right? And we may be able to figure that out and be really smart and do it really well. But, it's the back of a moving train. I mean, there's nothing that's going to be static about the next wave of shocks and how they combine, much less anything else that's going on. So that keeps me up at night for sure. And I wonder if, if we should really temper that with a bit of, much more focus on an adaptive management approach where you're getting, not great understanding, but fast enough to be able to do something about it and keep up in the front of the train.
Well, also to Lawrence's question, since you said we can't say all of the above, I'll say the first and the last. Based on 2 places that I've been working a lot lately, one of which is South Sudan and one of which is Somalia. As I was listening to Derek talk this afternoon, I thought, this would be great. If we had this kind of information, we could really understand a lot more about what's going on in South Sudan right now. But the very fact of what's going on in South Sudan right now means that the kind of system that Derek was describing probably can't work there now. And so the fear for me there is that we'll get a lot better information and a lot better measurement about places that maybe don't need it as badly as some others. So that's the South Sudan half of the story. The Somalia half of the story is that actually we had damn good information in 2011 and we ignored it.
Okay, I'll make 3 points. First, I'll try to answer Lauren's question. Okay, I'll pick the other 2. No, more seriously, I think we're allowed, actually not very more seriously, but we're allowed to change some of those multiple choices because, for example, if I had to ask the last question, instead of saying, are they going to be interested, I think it's more about, is it relevant? Because if it's relevant, it's through 1 and 2 that you make people interested. A lot of times we assume that the demand is there, but we need to create demand. And you're not going to create demand without having evidence. So I think we get to the end point of making people interested, making policymakers excited about something by providing evidence. So I think it's unfortunately it's not a single box. I think it's a multiple box. And then 2 more points, kind of picking up on the conversation that's been going on about World Bank people coming and say they want a single indicator of something, or as we were discussing before, people want a village level or unreasonably large samples because they need estimation of X, Y, and Z at the village level, or they need data every other day on X, Y, and Z. These are unreasonable demand, and this is our role to frame and to make a technical argument of why they're unreasonable. But also an important dimension here, they might be unreasonable now, but they might not be unreasonable or unfeasible 3 years down the road if we work for 3 years and building a system. So, and that's, I think the time dimension is important. But I think we need to kind of because I will always talk we preach it to the convert. It's clear to everybody in this room maybe, but to a policymaker it's not. And I think we need to continue making a strong argument. And the last point on the subjective, objective, and I think what we're seeking here from a lot of these things that we do is external validity. I mean, it's something that you can use beyond the single village or the two widows. And I think this is what we should strive by. This is why it becomes important when we do qualitative versus quantitative. I think those are complement instruments. It's not substitute. At the end of the day, if we say something about Village X, it will be useful for a particular NGO working in that village. No question about it. But we cannot assume that an NGO 50 kilometers down the road, can use the same information. And this is why that's the role of the quantitative, which is kind of trying to give a little bit of more representativeness, qualitative, like external validity to some of the things that we hear and the anecdotal evidence that floats around. That's not there.
Okay, well, thank you, first of all, to my fellow panelists, and also to you all for your questions and observations. I must admit, I'm sorely tempted to riff on Chris Benet's comment on the dark side of social cohesion. I think that would be a really fascinating thing to talk about some more. I think Lawrence Haddad raises some really important issues when he says that even if we can get the measurement and the diagnostics right, can people actually act on this information? But my third option, and one I'm going to choose, is actually talk about my fears and nightmares. Or at least one of them, okay? If you look at the way in which resilience is being discussed in this forum and in other forums, one approach is to, in a sense, be cynical and say, you know what, it's just a buzzword, you know? My organization does an intervention where we do, I don't know, food for assets, and now in 2014 we're going to call it food for resilient assets. If we think there's money in the word, we're happy to use the word. So there's a temptation, I think, to be potentially really cynical about this. Or I think there's a more valid approach, which is take it really seriously. And I think the reason I take it seriously as an idea comes out of the work that I've done with colleagues at IFPRI and elsewhere on some of the long-term consequences of undernutrition in children. What we do know from that work is children exposed to a variety of shocks, whether they be economic shocks, or climatic shocks, or civil conflict. If those children end up being chronically nourished in early life, it's going to follow them for the rest of their lives. Those are immense welfare losses to those individuals, their societies. And in principle, they're preventable. You know, we talk about all these shocks and stressors, and there's this element in this conversation that these things just kind of happen, when they don't really happen, right? Conflict, economic shocks, those are basically, in effect, self-created. They're man-made shocks. So thinking about actions which can reduce those shocks and stressors, thinking about actions that can make families and households and children resilient in the face of those, has really big welfare gains. We can, without sounding too corny, we can genuinely make the world a better place. So we have this really cool idea, but all ideas follow a cycle. There is the initial ferment, discussion, back and forth, and discussion like that is always followed by hype, but inflated hype. All of a sudden, everyone pours all their hopes, their dreams, the opposite of Lawrence's fears and nightmares, into this idea. What happens after inflated hype? Well, it's the trough of dissolution. You know, I thought this was going to be a great idea. It turns out not to be helpful. My sense with the cycle of ideas, in life generally, but particularly in development, is that cycle is going faster and faster. Okay? That I perceive as people talking about resilience, we're clearly in the hype phase. But there's the sense we can have all the answers by, somebody said to me in an earlier meeting this week, I need all these answers by July. Okay? And that's just crazy. But there's a real risk that the consequence of that is when these answers don't come as quickly as some people might like, because we fall into this trough of dissolution. And we lose out on the potential gains from what we might get from this very powerful concept of resilience.
So what's the placebo effect? Give them something to make them feel better.
Okay, very good. It's 8, so I will make this brief. And I want to highlight some points that we made and some points that we didn't make. There is a real challenge before us. And one of them has not been, I think it's been articulated perhaps obliquely but not directly, is that the very fact that we're looking at resilience, and that's of interest to us, has to do with working in an environment where shocks are increasingly frequent and more severe and decreasingly predictable. There's a random 800-pound randomly oriented gorilla in the room, and we have to face that squarely, and it creates all kinds of inconveniences for our programming. It really disturbs our model, does all kinds of annoying things like makes our stylized curves not work, it requires changing program on the fly. So that's going to be a challenge that we have before us. I think the focus of our work is going to be improving our predictive capacity. And I'm not trying to reduce what we're doing here. It has nothing to do with qualitative or quantitative. But a famous philosopher of science, Paul Meehl, once said that science cannot be boiled down simply to prediction, the game of science, but prediction often decides the game. And I think we're in an applied field, and our capacity to predict and make predictions that hold and ultimately overscale is going to be critical, because prediction is what allows us to make intelligent investments and get the payoff that results in improving human welfare. So what is our work that we have before us? And this is something I think that we've not done, and we're kind of, I think one can pick it up if you went across all the comments, but at the heart of our work, which links prediction and deals with complexities of living in a world that's increasingly random or stochastic, is we need more carefully specified causal models that reflect this complexity. And that's important for our modeling, and it's important for our programming. Once the causal models are specified, at least at a basic level, we then can identify opportunities to collect data. We can identify where the indicators should be. Indicators are in service of the causal models, at least in the kind of work we're talking about here. I want to end on one note, and I can simply say stay tuned and see what the FSIN, what the technical working group does. But I'd rather try to put it this way, and it's a bit, aphoristic sounding. This kind of phrase has been trotted out before. I think it's never more true before than it is here right now. And I think we'll know when we've got there. And here's the question: how will we know whether we've made progress on what we're trying to do? What's been laid out here today? And here I'm speaking primarily in measurement, in the work of the technical working group. I think we'll know this when we have the most effective blend of technical measurement practices that reflect and put us in the direction of precision on the one hand. I shouldn't say on the one hand because it's meant to be an integrated solution, with the complexities of field settings. When we have to close that gap, and we have to have a dialogue that's productive, where measures are seen as have a high degree of utility and also have a high degree of information for policy and for practice. So on there, and I'll thank the panelists, and I'll really thank IFPRI and FAO and WFP and anyone else.